And then let's talk about huge election news, and there are a few things here. First up, we got an update regarding that story coming out of Texas where you had Governor Greg Abbott issuing that proclamation, which notably limited the number of absentee ballot drop box locations for early voting to just 1 per county, with some, including U.S. District Judge Robert Pittman, saying the order created confusion among voters and disproportionately affected elderly voters, voters with disabilities, and voters in populous counties. That judge also overturned the proclamation on Friday, but then on Saturday, an appeals court judge issued a temporary stay on Pittman's decision, right? Meaning that Abbott's proclamation was essentially in effect again, at least until the appeals court made a decision in this case. And the reason we're updating this story is because late last night, that court sided with Abbott, writing, leaving the governor's October 1st proclamation in place still gives Texas absentee voters many ways to cast their ballots in the November 3rd election. These methods for remote voting outstrip what Texas law previously permitted in a pre-COVID world. The October 1st proclamation abridges no one's right to vote. Though we saw a number of people critical of this appeals court, especially since all 3 judges were appointed by Donald Trump. But ultimately, where this story ends is essentially taking what I recommended yesterday and saying, well, now you kind of have to do it if you're going to go this way. If you're an absentee voter and you want to hand deliver your ballot, you have to do so at the single location in your county now. But our main story around elections and voting involves Georgia, where we saw absolutely massive lines of people waiting to vote. In fact, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, some people waited more than 8 hours in line, with other outlets reporting that people were still waiting in line past 10 p.m. in some places. Hell, I mean, lines were so long, we even saw people bringing their own lawn chairs like they were outside of a Best Buy waiting for a Black Friday doorbuster. One video tweeted by former Senator Claire McCaskill even showing people lined up more than a street away at one voting center. McCaskill saying, this is a picture of voter suppression. Why do Americans have to wait in lines this long? And for some context here, yesterday was the first day of early voting in the state, so you had a ton of people wanting to cast their votes as soon as possible. And to that point, we saw one woman who had waited in line for 5 hours telling a local reporter on the ground,
and it doesn't matter how long it takes, we will stand in line to vote. So I think that's the most important part. We're voting like our life depends on it.
Right, we've been seeing people with that mentality, people saying we're voting like our life depends on it. But I want to go back to what McCaskill said for a moment. This is a form of voter suppression, because she was far from the only person saying that, with people tweeting things like, what's happening in Georgia should upset us all. There is no reason people should wait hours in line to vote. Pure voter suppression. And actually with that, we also saw a lot of people saying they weren't able to vote because the lines were so long, with stories and examples popping up, like a woman saying she had to leave after an hour and a half of standing in line because she had an appointment to go to. They're saying voting should not be this difficult, calling this disheartening. But at the same time, while you had people calling this voter suppression, we also saw reports like Georgia breaks record for first day of early voting, with the Georgia Secretary of State estimating that nearly 127,000 Georgians voted yesterday, up from the previous record of 90,000, which is why you had some people tweeting things like, so much voter suppression happened in Georgia yesterday that almost 37,000 more people voted than any other early voting day. Someone should be arrested for this travesty of justice. Others pointing to the fact that Georgia is one of the states which allows any registered voter to request an absentee ballot. Alongside that, we also saw a number of experts questioning if this really was a form of voter suppression, including David Becker, executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, who said, I'd be concerned if I didn't see long lines. We're 22 days away from the election. Anyone who sees a long line and does not have the time to wait can come back tomorrow. With Becker then going on to say that the long lines for early voting are a sign of voter enthusiasm, noting that every person who votes early is one less person who could be stuck in line on election night. However, you also had people like Kristen Clark, president of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, saying on Twitter, some of this is voter enthusiasm, but this is just not acceptable in a modern day democracy. We need restoration of the Voting Rights Act and officials who will provide more voting opportunities during a pandemic. Right? Essentially making the argument of, yes, there was a record-breaking turnout, but if people are still finding themselves in situations where they're having to wait hours on end just to vote, with some people having to leave before they can even cast their vote, then there is still an underlying fundamental problem that needs to be addressed. Right? How many people get discouraged and don't go back? How many people leave and only come back on election day, and that day is just a nightmare? And while experts agree that they will likely see a dip in these lines over the next few weeks, they also expect stories like this to come back again closer to the election. And with saying that, do not worry, I will stop being a broken record soon. Vote as early as possible. You do not want to wait until election day and then boom, what kind of unexpected trouble could happen? Which, I mean, on that note, part of the reason that lines were so long in some places yesterday wasn't just because of the sheer number of people. There were also reports of technical glitches that delayed voting. For example, in Atlanta at the State Farm Arena, lines came to a stop when check-in tablets started giving voters error messages, and instead of issuing emergency paper ballots, poll workers and tech support staff held up lines to fix the tablets. Also, on that note, yesterday, literally the same day as that, a federal judge in Georgia rejected an effort to require higher numbers of emergency paper ballots at Georgia polling places. But in addition to glitches and questions about the role of paper ballots, lines were also held up yesterday by people who had originally requested mail-in ballots. Right, with them now showing up to vote in person instead, some saying they were concerned about voting by mail because of potential delays and President Trump's attacks on mail-in voting. And with that, you had a county elections director saying that slows things down because they have to cancel that one in order to vote in person, so there's more steps. And the thing is, we should not expect this to just be a day one problem or even just a Georgia issue. I mean, there are going to be no shortage of these stories in the coming days. Hell, this morning, just as I was starting today's show, we started seeing reports that an accidentally cut cable crashed Virginia's entire voter registration system. And there, some saying accidentally, others saying accidentally, right? Because notably there, today just happens to be the last day for people in the state to register to vote. But yeah, those are the stories we're seeing right now. Of course, I'd love to know your thoughts on any and all of it, but ultimately, that is where I'm going to end.